She walked onto the shooting range in a faded t-shirt. The local champion mocked her. "Sweetie, we don't sell lattes here." He bet $500 she would miss. What they didn't know? The woman they underestimated was Gunnery Sergeant Kaelan Vance, a Marine Corps legend, and her former commanding officer knew they had just made their final mistake. A pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you like these stories, be sure to hit that subscribe button to get the earliest notifications. The late July sun beat down on the plains outside Bozeman, Montana, baking the earth into a cracked, dusty canvas under a vast, pale blue sky. The air was thick with the scent of dry grass, hot metal, and the sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder that hung over the annual Big Sky shooting competition. It was a place of loud boasts and louder rifles, where men in worn denim and expensive cowboy hats judged each other by the tightness of their shot groups. Kaelan Vance, 24, felt entirely out of place, yet utterly unfazed. She stood leaning against the fender of a rusted Ford pickup, her dark brown hair pulled back into a tight, severe bun that emphasized the sharp lines of her face. Her ash-gray eyes, calm and analytical, scanned the boisterous crowd. To her, this wasn't a social event. It was a terrain to be assessed. She cataloged the players with the practiced ease of a soldier, the alphas, the followers, the potential threats. It was a skill honed not on shooting ranges like this, but in the unforgiving deserts of Helmand Province. Beside her, her best friend Maya de la Rosa shifted nervously. Also 24, Maya was a stark contrast to Kaelan's quiet intensity. Her dark, expressive eyes, a legacy of her family's deep roots in this valley, were wide with anxiety, and she twisted a loose thread on her worn flannel shirt. "I don't know about this, Kay," she whispered. "Look at him." Her gaze flickered towards Cade Callahan. He was a man who seemed molded from the Montana landscape itself, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating an aggressive confidence. In his late 20s, he wore his wealth like a second skin, from his custom-tooled leather boots to the expensive Stetson that shaded a perpetually smug face. Cade was the reigning champion, and he never let anyone forget it. He was laughing with a group of friends, his voice carrying easily across the dusty lot. His arrogance, Kaelan noted, wasn't born from confidence, but from a deep-seated insecurity she had seen in too many men with too much power. The source of Maya's anxiety stood near the fence line, her parents. Javier de la Rosa, a man in his late 50s, had a face as weathered as the barn on his property, his hands calloused from a lifetime of ranching. He stood stiffly, his pride warring with the palpable worry in his eyes as he stared at Cade. Beside him, Elena, his wife, possessed a quiet, resilient strength, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her lips moving in what looked like a silent prayer. The $50,000 prize money wasn't just a prize. It was a lifeline. It was the only thing standing between their ancestral home, Riverbend Ranch, and foreclosure. And Cade Callahan was circling like a vulture, not just for the land, but for the precious water rights of the river that snaked through their property. He had approached Javier earlier, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Just take my offer, Javier," he'd said. "It's a lot less embarrassing than losing it all like this." The first event began. It was the handgun qualification, and Maya's turn came. She stepped forward, taking the heavy revolver from its case. It was a Ruger Super Blackhawk, a .44 Magnum with a polished wooden grip, an heirloom from her grandfather. Under the weight of her family's future, her hands trembled slightly. The first two shots were solid, but on the third, the immense pressure caused her grip to falter for a fraction of a second. The gun roared, and the powerful recoil, improperly absorbed, twisted her wrist with a sickening crack. A sharp cry of pain escaped her lips, and the heavy revolver fell to the dusty ground. It was over. Hope vanished from Javier's face, replaced by grim resignation. "Well, well," Cade's voice boomed, dripping with mock pity. "Looks like Riverbend is on the market." Tears of frustration and pain streamed down Maya's face as Kaelan knelt beside her, her hands moving with the efficient, gentle precision of a combat medic. "It's sprained," Kaelan said softly, her voice a low anchor in Maya's storm of despair. "You can't continue." She helped her friend off the field, ignoring the snickers from Cade's posse. Then, she turned to the range officer. She's registered. I'm taking her place." The officer, a portly man with a sunburnt nose, looked her up and down, from her simple t-shirt to her worn hiking boots. Cade let out a bark of laughter. "Let her! This ought to be good. I'll bet $500 she can't even hit the backstop." He looked at Kaelan's boots. "Those look better suited for the mall than a firing line." The crowd chuckled. Kaelan met Cade's mocking gaze. She didn't say a word. She simply gave a single, sharp nod of acceptance. Then she walked back to the firing line, bent down, and picked up the Super Blackhawk. The heavy steel settled into her hand as if it were an extension of her own arm. Her grip was perfect, her stance balanced, a silent, deadly promise in the hot Montana sun. As Kaelan stepped into the designated shooting box, a palpable shift occurred in her demeanor. The ambient noise of the crowd, the shimmer of heat rising from the ground, the anxious gaze of the De La Rosa family, it all faded into a distant, irrelevant hum. Her mind entered a state her old gunnery sergeant used to call the still space, a place of absolute focus forged in the crucible of countless hours of training. Her breath hitched into a controlled, 4-second cadence. Inhale, hold, exhale, pause. Her heart rate, which had been steady, slowed further. The world narrowed to the 5 white steel plates gleaming under the sun, the front sight of the Ruger, and the trigger. The timer beeped, a sharp electronic sound that sliced through the heavy air, and Kaelan moved. It wasn't a rush, it was a flow of pure economy, a lethal grace that seemed utterly alien to the quiet woman in the faded t-shirt. Her arms extended, forming a perfect isosceles triangle with her body. Bang ping, bang ping. 2 targets fell. She transitioned with the fluid motion of a predator, her torso twisting, her feet barely seeming to move. Bang ping, 2 more. The final target, the stop plate, was the furthest. A final, deliberate breath. Bang ping. The timer beeped again. A silence hung for a moment, thicker than the dust, before the announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, incredulous. "Shooter on lane 3, 2.87 seconds." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Whispers replaced the earlier snickers. Men who had spent their lives around firearms exchanged looks of disbelief. On the elevated judges' platform, a man in a crisp polo shirt and a local Cattlemen's Association cap turned to his companion. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. His companion did not reply immediately. Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC, retired, leaned forward, his elbows resting on the railing. Thorne was a man in his late 60s, lean and wiry, with a ramrod posture that retirement had failed to soften. His face was a roadmap of a life spent in harsh sunlight, and his pale blue eyes, accustomed to scanning vast, dangerous horizons, missed nothing. He hadn't been watching the timer. He'd been watching Kaelan. He watched as she calmly ejected the spent casings, and it was the next movement that made him sit bolt upright. Between strings of fire, she performed a reload. Her left hand brought a fresh speed loader to the cylinder, as her right thumb expertly worked the ejector rod. It was a fluid, seamless motion, executed without looking down, her eyes never leaving the field of fire. It was a combat reload, an act of pure muscle memory drilled into a soldier until it was as natural as breathing. "She's no amateur," Thorne said quietly, his voice a low rumble that held the quiet authority of command. "That's not something you learn for a weekend competition." Down by the spectator line, Maya watched, her sprained wrist temporarily forgotten. A young medic named Sarah, a volunteer with kind eyes and capable hands, was finishing wrapping the bandage. "Your friend is something else," Sarah said, her voice filled with admiration as she secured the dressing. Maya could only nod, tears of hope now tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. She had seen Kaelan practice, had known she was a good shot, but this was different. This wasn't Kaelan shooting for fun. This was Gunnery Sergeant Vance on a mission. The focus, the lethal precision. It was a side of her friend she had only glimpsed in hushed stories Kaelan never elaborated on. The pressure of the crowd's sudden attention now coiled around Cade Callahan. He stood with his arms crossed, a scowl fixed on his face. "Luck," he spat to one of his friends, a burly man who now seemed more interested in Kaelan's next run than in his boss's commentary. Beginner's luck. She won't be able to keep it up, but his words lacked conviction. He tried to crack a joke, but it fell flat. No one was listening. Every eye was fixed on the quiet woman, who was methodically, silently, dismantling the competition and Cade's reputation with it. The local ranchers and farmers, men who valued substance over style, nodded to each other in quiet approval. They recognized authentic skill when they saw it, and they were seeing it in its purest form. Kaelan finished the stage, placing the now cool revolver gently on the table. She gave no sign of triumph, no smile, no acknowledgement of the stunned silence she had created. She simply turned and walked back toward Maya, her gray eyes as calm and unreadable as a Montana sky before a storm. The final event was long-range rifle marksmanship, the undisputed king of the Big Sky competition. 3 steel targets were placed at staggering distances, 800, 1,000, and 1,200 yards. Between the firing line and the targets lay an open valley, a playground for the infamous Montana wind. It was an invisible, fickle beast, gusting without pattern, capable of pushing a bullet several feet off course. For most shooters, it was a nightmare. For Kaelan, it was a language she understood intimately. Cade Callahan strode to the firing mat, his confidence restored. This was his domain. He settled behind a custom-built rifle that likely cost more than a new truck, its enormous scope gleaming. He consulted a handheld Kestrel wind meter, a piece of technology that gave him data on wind speed, direction, and air density. He was the picture of the modern, well-equipped marksman. His first shot, at 800 yards, was a confident, resounding ping. The second, at 1,000, followed suit. The crowd applauded, and a smug grin returned to his face. He adjusted for the final target, the one at 1,200 yards, the shot that separated the champions from the contenders. He glanced over at Kaelan, a flicker of dismissive arrogance in his eyes. He rushed the calculation, overconfident in his equipment and his skill. He fired. For a long moment, there was only the echo of the gunshot, then a dull, unsatisfying clang. The bullet had struck the edge of the steel plate, not the center. A hit, but an imperfect one. He cursed under his breath, a crack in his polished facade. As Cade walked off, his face a thundercloud, the De La Rosa family held its collective breath. Javier stood as still as a statue, his eyes locked on Kaelan, his entire being focused on this one slim hope. Elena clutched a small wooden rosary in her hand, her knuckles white. This was no longer a competition for them. It was a trial. Then it was Kaelan's turn. She lay down on the mat, settling behind a standard-issue-looking rifle that seemed plain in comparison to Cade's. She had no wind meter, no electronic gadgets. She simply lay still, her cheek welded to the stock of the rifle. She plucked a single blade of dry grass and let it fall from her fingers, watching its gentle arc. She wasn't looking at the windsock near the firing line. She was looking far downrange, her eyes focused on the shimmering heat mirage rising from the valley floor. To a trained eye, the waves of the mirage were a perfect map of the wind's invisible currents. While everyone else saw empty air, she saw a river with eddies and rapids. She took her time, her breathing slowing to the same controlled rhythm as before. The crowd was utterly silent now, captivated by the quiet woman's unorthodox methods. She fired her first shot. A second passed, then another, before a sharp, clear ping echoed back from the 800-yard target. Dead center. She chambered another round, her movements economical and precise. She made a minute adjustment to her scope, her gray eyes still reading the story of the air. The second shot was fired. Again, the agonizing weight, and again, the pure, clean sound of a perfect hit on the 1,000-yard target. Cade, who had been pacing like a caged animal, stopped dead. His face was pale with disbelief. He began muttering to his friend, his voice a desperate whisper. "She can't." The wind shifted. "It's impossible." Now, only the final target remained. 1,200 yards, nearly 3/4 of a mile. The wind picked up, whipping dust across the range. Kaelan didn't fire. She waited and waited. Her focus was absolute. She was waiting for the lull, the momentary pause between gusts that only a master marksman would know how to anticipate. For a single breathless second, the windsock drooped, the heat mirage steadied. It was the window. She exhaled smoothly, and the rifle cracked, a sharp report in the sudden stillness. The silence that followed was absolute. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. Then, faint but unmistakable, a final perfect ping traveled back across the valley. Before the range officer could even call the result, Colonel Thorne was on his feet. He descended from the judge's platform, his movements stiff but purposeful, and walked directly onto the field. The crowd parted for him. He stopped beside Kaelan as she was getting to her feet, his expression one of profound respect. "That technique," he said, his voice carrying in the silence, waiting for the lull, reading the mirage instead of the flag. "They only teach that at the Scout Sniper School in Camp Pendleton." He looked her directly in the eye. "I've reviewed the files of every top marksman to come out of the Corps in the last decade. I've heard the stories, the shot in Helmand during a sandstorm." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "It's an honor to meet you, Gunnery Sergeant Vance." The name and rank dropped into the stunned silence like a grenade. Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. The puzzle pieces clicked into place for everyone. The quiet woman, the worn clothes, the impossible skill. Javier de la Rosa looked across the field at Cade Callahan, and for the first time in months, his eyes held not fear, but pure, unadulterated contempt. The stunned silence that followed Colonel Thorne's declaration was shattered by a deafening roar from the crowd. It was a wave of applause, shouts, and questions. Suddenly, Kaelan was no longer an anonymous figure, but the center of a swirling vortex of attention. A young, breathless reporter from the local Bozeman Chronicle, a woman named Linda May with an eager face and a microphone thrust forward like a weapon, was the first to reach her. "Gunnery Sergeant Vance, can you tell us what that was like? Is it true about your service record in Afghanistan?" Kaelan took an involuntary step back, her training screaming at her to retreat from the closing circle. This was a different kind of threat, one she was wholly unprepared for. She hated the spotlight, the intrusive questions that sought to turn her service, her duty, into a spectacle. Her hands clenched into loose fists at her sides. "I was just here to help a friend," she said, her voice low and tight, scanning the crowd for an escape route. She spotted Maya and her family being congratulated near the registration table and used it as her anchor, pushing through the throng of well-wishers and curious onlookers. The announcer called her name for the prize ceremony. She numbly accepted the handshakes and the ridiculously oversized $50,000 check, the camera flashes feeling like small explosions in front of her eyes. She didn't pause on the makeshift stage. She walked directly off it, holding the giant piece of cardboard, and moved with purpose through the parting crowd until she reached Maya. Without a word, she pushed the check into her friend's hands. Maya stared at it, then at Kaelan, her eyes overflowing with tears of pure, unadulterated gratitude. She dropped the check and threw her arms around Kaelan, sobbing into her shoulder. "You saved us," she cried. "You saved everything." In that moment, holding her friend, Kaelan felt a profound sense of release that no battlefield victory had ever given her. This was different. This wasn't about destruction or neutralizing a threat. This was about protection, about creation, about giving a family its future back. She wasn't a weapon. She was a shield. Across the field, Cade Callahan was experiencing the bitter taste of social obliteration. His defeat was total and absolute. It wasn't just that he had lost the competition. He had lost his aura of dominance, the respect that he had always commanded through fear and wealth. A few business associates who had been clapping him on the back an hour ago now avoided his gaze, suddenly finding their boots incredibly interesting. The final blow came from Elias Thorne, the colonel's older brother, and a pillar of the ranching community. Elias was a man in his 70s with a face like a wind-worn butte and hands that looked as though they could crush rock. He was a man of few words, but his opinion carried more weight than a herd of cattle. He completely ignored Cade's attempt at a nod and walked directly to Javier de la Rosa. He extended a calloused hand. "Javier," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble, "you've raised good people. You're a girl, and the company she keeps." He nodded towards Kaelan. "That's the kind of grit this valley was built on." That simple handshake, in front of everyone, was a public transfer of respect. Cade's reign was over. That evening, the air at Riverbend Ranch was filled not with tension, but with the rich smell of grilled steak and the sound of laughter. String lights glowed warmly between the porch and a large oak tree, illuminating the joyful faces of the De La Rosa family and a few close neighbors. Kaelan sat on the porch steps, slightly apart from the main celebration, nursing a cold beer. She watched as Maya danced with her father, a genuine carefree smile lighting up her face. A scruffy three-legged border collie named Tripod, the ranch's unofficial greeter, limped over and rested his grizzled head on her knee. Kaelan stroked his ears, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. This was the peace she had fought for in far-flung, dusty countries. A simple, profound peace she had rarely felt herself. After a while, Maya came and sat beside her on the steps, their shoulders touching. They watched the stars begin to emerge in the vast, ink-black sky. "What will you do now, Kay?" Maya asked quietly, her voice serious for the first time all evening. "Will you go back?" Kaelan didn't answer right away. She looked up at the Milky Way, a brilliant splash of light against the darkness, clearer and brighter here than anywhere she had ever been. She thought of her small, empty apartment, of the transient life she had lived since leaving the service, a life that felt more like waiting than living. Here, under the big sky, surrounded by the warmth of a grateful family, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she was missing. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I think I might start looking for answers right here." It wasn't a decision, but it was a beginning, a promise of a future where her skills could be used to mend fences instead of breaking enemies, where peace wasn't just the absence of war, but the presence of a home. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are the ones we don't recognize. Was it merely a coincidence that the one person in the world, with the exact skill set needed to save a family from ruin, was standing in that dusty field at that exact moment? Or was it an answer to a prayer? God often works through the people he places in our lives. The De La Rosa family prayed for a miracle, and that miracle didn't arrive with a choir of angels or a flash of light. It arrived in the quiet, unassuming form of a friend who refused to let them fall. Kaelan's skills, forged in the fires of war, were repurposed by a higher power for an act of protection and grace. In our own lives, we are often underestimated, judged by our appearance or our quiet nature. People may not see the strength, the talent, and the resilience that lies within us. This story is a reminder that your true worth is not determined by the opinions of others. It is defined by your actions and the heart you have for those you care about. You too have God-given gifts. You may be the quiet miracle waiting in the wings of someone else's life, the answer to a prayer they have whispered in the dark. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength. Let us know in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching from? And to continue seeing stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching. May God bless you and your family, always.